Germany dominated Europe by 1940, crushing France in weeks and standing unopposed across the continent. Britain stood alone, isolated and vulnerable. The Soviet Union faced devastating early losses. America remained distant and uncommitted to European conflict. One strategic decision after France's collapse could have changed everything. A different approach in the East might have fractured the Soviet state entirely. Hitler's own choices ensured his enemies would eventually overwhelm him. But just how narrow was Germany's path to victory? The moment everything could have changed. By June 1940, Germany stood undefeated. France had fallen in just 6 weeks. The British army barely escaped at Dunkirk, leaving behind tanks, weapons, and hope. Across Europe, no one could challenge Hitler's military machine. But here's what most people don't know. At that exact moment, Germany faced a choice. Hitler could have focused all his resources on one goal: cutting Britain off from the world. More submarines, tighter blockades, starving the island into submission. Historians believe this strategy might have worked. Britain depended on ships bringing food, fuel, and supplies from across the ocean. If those ships stopped arriving, the British people would have faced a terrible decision: negotiate peace or face starvation. And if the British soldiers at Dunkirk had been captured instead of rescued, Britain would have lost its entire professional army in one devastating blow. So why didn't Hitler take this path? The answer reveals his first fatal mistake. Hitler's first fatal mistake. Instead of strangling Britain slowly, Hitler chose a faster, more dramatic option: air superiority. He ordered the Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, to dominate British skies. The plan was simple: destroy the Royal Air Force, control the skies, then invade. This became known as the Battle of Britain. But the British didn't break. Their pilots fought desperately, and their new technology, radar, gave them a critical advantage. They could see German planes coming before they arrived. The Luftwaffe lost hundreds of aircraft. Pilots were exhausted, and by late 1940, Hitler realized the truth: he couldn't win control of British skies. This failure meant Britain survived, and as long as Britain survived, it remained a base for future operations against Germany, a thorn that would never go away. But Hitler wasn't finished making mistakes, because in 1941, he turned his attention east and made a decision that would doom his entire empire. Operation Barbarossa, the gamble that shook the world. On June 22, 1941, Germany launched the largest invasion in human history. 3 million soldiers, thousands of tanks, endless columns of troops pouring across the Soviet border. Operation Barbarossa had begun. At first, it looked unstoppable. Soviet forces were caught completely off guard. Entire armies were surrounded and eliminated. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured in the opening weeks. Cities fell one after another. Hitler believed the Soviet Union would collapse within months, and for a brief moment, it seemed possible. But here's where the second what-if emerges. Some historians argue that Germany could have actually won in the East, not through military force alone, but through a completely different approach. If Hitler had treated the Soviet people as allies instead of enemies, history might have turned out very differently. Because millions of Soviet citizens hated Stalin's harsh rule, and many were ready to turn against him. The strategy Hitler refused to use. When German forces entered Soviet territory, something unexpected happened. In some towns and villages, people greeted them as liberators. They saw the Germans as freedom from Stalin's brutal government. Ukrainians, Belarusians, and others hoped for a chance at independence. This was Germany's golden opportunity. Historians suggest that if Hitler had allied with these populations, offered them autonomy, respect, and partnership, the Soviet Union might have fractured from within: local uprisings, divided loyalties, a collapsing state. But Hitler's ideology wouldn't allow it. He viewed Slavic peoples as inferior. His invasion wasn't just military, it was a mission of elimination and domination. Entire communities were treated harshly, resources were seized, trust was destroyed. Instead of gaining millions of allies, Germany created millions of enemies. The Soviet people united, not for Stalin, but against the invader. Resistance grew fierce. The war in the East became a grinding, merciless struggle. And then Hitler made his third catastrophic mistake, one that sealed Germany's fate forever. The declaration that ended everything. December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, dragging America into the Pacific War. 4 days later, Hitler did something historians still debate. He declared war on the United States. He didn't have to. America wasn't required to fight Germany just because Japan attacked. But Hitler made the decision anyway, believing America was weak, distracted, and far away. He was catastrophically wrong. America's industrial power was beyond anything Hitler imagined. Factories that made cars now made tanks. Shipyards that built luxury liners now built warships. Within months, American production dwarfed Germany's capacity. By 1943, America was producing more planes, more ships, and more weapons than Germany could ever hope to match. The war had become a math problem, and Germany was on the losing side of the equation. Britain endured, the Soviet Union held, and now America's endless resources joined the fight. From this point forward, Germany's defeat wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. The turning point when victory became impossible. By late 1942, the war had shifted completely. In North Africa, British forces achieved a decisive victory at El Alamein, pushing German troops back and breaking their momentum. In the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, Soviet forces surrounded and eliminated an entire German army. Over 300,000 soldiers were trapped. Fewer than 6,000 ever saw home again. And across the Atlantic, American forces and resources were pouring into Europe and the Pacific. Germany now faced enemies on all sides. The industrial output of three global powers, Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States, was crushing Germany's ability to fight. Hitler's early victories had been built on speed and surprise, but now the war had become exactly what Germany couldn't win, a long, grinding struggle of resources and endurance. There would be no negotiated peace, no consolidation of territory, no pathway to victory. The turning point had passed. So, looking back, just how close did Hitler actually come to winning? How close was Germany, really? The honest answer? Not very close. Germany never had the resources to defeat all three major Allied powers at once. Its military was powerful, but its industrial base was too small. Its population was too limited. Its fuel and raw materials were stretched impossibly thin. Even in 1940, at the height of Germany's dominance, the odds were stacked against long-term victory. But there were narrow windows. Brief moments where Germany might have achieved something historians call a favorable outcome. If Britain had been forced into peace after France fell, Germany would have controlled Western Europe unopposed. That's not total victory, but it's a position of immense power. If the Soviet Union had fractured due to internal unrest and smarter German strategy, the Eastern Front might have stabilized on German terms. But both required Hitler to act differently than his ideology allowed. Instead, his decisions opened multiple fronts, united his enemies, and guaranteed his destruction. And the final consequences of those choices would reshape the entire world.
The final lesson: why Germany's defeat was inevitable. By 1943, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Germany faced the combined industrial might of the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and the United States. Every month, Allied production outpaced German output by staggering margins. The Luftwaffe, once feared across Europe, was grounded by fuel shortages and overwhelming enemy numbers. German cities were being reduced to rubble by relentless operations from above. And on the ground, Soviet forces were advancing westward, reclaiming territory mile by mile. Hitler's empire, which had seemed unstoppable just 3 years earlier, was collapsing. The war would drag on until May 1945, but the result had been decided long before. Germany's defeat wasn't just military, it was mathematical, industrial, inevitable. Hitler's ambitions had exceeded his nation's capacity. His ideology had blinded him to strategic realities. And his choices had united the world's most powerful nations against him. In the end, Germany never truly came close to winning World War II because victory required resources, allies, and wisdom that Hitler never possessed. The Battle of Stalingrad marked the moment Nazi Germany's victory chances vanished forever. W2 turning points like this determined how Allies won W2, not through luck, but through industrial strength and united resistance. Hitler's empire crumbled because ambition alone couldn't overcome reality. History remembers not what might have been, but what actually was.